could have been. This, like I mentioned in my previous video, is a topic that comes up all the time when we talk about anything related to comic books. Whether it's a live action TV show, live action movie, a movie universe, or even in animation. And actually today we're going to be talking about one of the biggest what could have been situations that there has ever been when it comes to comic book movies and also comic book movie series. And that's why today we are talking the Snyderverse, the DCEU, what could have been. But before we get into anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, hit that noti bell. Alright, the DCEU, otherwise known as the Snyderverse. Say what you will about this universe, it was definitely a darker spin. I think it had a lot to do with the Injustice series coming out, the game series, and just a bit more of a darker approach to these characters, and I don't think that's an innately bad thing. I understand the trepidations and reservations people did have with regards to making some of those characters the way they were portrayed in the Snyderverse, but I also think a lot of it does make sense. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not someone who is just gung-ho about the Snyderverse. I do acknowledge that it had its fair share of issues. However, when we look at what could have been, we were deprived of some of the best potential projects ever as far as superhero movies. And that brings me to the very first movie I want to talk about, and that is the Ben Affleck Batman movie. Now, this was a movie that was obviously going to star Ben Affleck, but originally when it was pitched, and for a long time, Ben Affleck was actually going to also direct this movie, which would have been so interesting to have a Batman film that stars an actor who is also directing the film. That could have been revolutionary. And now, obviously, say what you want to about Ben Affleck's Batman. Was he perfect? Was the killing a bit overboard? Again, these opinions are understandable. I personally don't mind a Batman who kills. My issue lies within the fact that he's killing these no-name crooks, but then lets the Joker live after killing Dick Grayson. That's the only thing realistically that ever bothered me about Batfleck. Other than that, I understand him feeling the need to kill by that point. Do I think he's maybe a little too aggressive with the branding? Yes, but he is a Batman who has seen a lot and lost the person he's arguably closest with aside from Alfred. Now that being said, this Batman film, we have a lot of details about it. It was going to be set up from the post-credits scene from Justice League, and actually I personally like the Snyder cut of the Justice League way more than the Joss Whedon cut, and I don't remember if we quite got a post-credit scene like we did with the Zack Snyder cut, and that is Deathstroke arriving on that cruise ship, meeting Lex Luthor, and then he is made aware of who Batman is. So that being said, the story's coming out about what the Batman movie was supposed to be, was going to be a movie starring Ben Affleck, but also Deathstroke. Deathstroke was set to be the main villain of that movie, and it was going to be a story in which, obviously now Deathstroke knows Bruce Wayne is Batman, and he, for some reason, had a personal vendetta against Batman. And the movie was going to not only explore that, and explain why he has that personal vendetta, but it would have showed us Deathstroke slowly dismantling every aspect of Bruce Wayne and Batman's life. And there are rumors about Alfred potentially being a casualty in that. Now, I couldn't find anything concrete from Zack Snyder or any actual storyboards regarding that, so I don't know if that part was actually true. If it was, that's absolutely insane. That would be one of the only times we've actually seen Alfred perish in a film, whether it's animated or live action. And if they actually did that, that would have been absolutely insane. It would have definitely had an emotional impact, not only for Batman, but for everyone in the audience too. I love Alfred. He is one of my favorite characters. He is so cool and such a badass. So to see him potentially be taken out by Deathstroke, possibly as a result of something that Batman did in the past, that would have just carried so much weight, not only in that film when he has to face off against Deathstroke, But going forward in the DCEU, having to deal with that guilt, and obviously we know Batman already harbors a ton of guilt, more specifically in this universe, because Dick Grayson also was killed by one of his arch enemies. Now, another really cool aspect of this movie that I think would have been amazing, obviously the combat with Ben Affleck's Batman has always been something that has been praised, even by people who are not a big fan of his portrayal. But seeing a Batman, not only with that amount of physicality going toe to toe with Deathstroke, but also a Batman who is okay with killing. So this would have been a bloodlusted Batman, especially if Alfred was killed in this film, going up against the world's greatest assassin, Deathstroke. So the fact that we got deprived of that movie is honestly a shame. And I remember when all the rumors started coming out about Ben Affleck being attached, and then for whatever reason he wasn't. Then the film got delayed, and then as we know, it was just a negative snowball effect from there for the DCEU, which is really a shame because that movie could have been one of the best comic book films and even one of the best Batman films we've ever gotten. Now, again, it could have come out and been absolutely horrible. We will never know. But the fact of the matter is, it had the potential to be one of the greatest comic book films we've ever seen and given us some of the greatest combat we've ever seen. Deathstroke is a character that I absolutely love. He's one of my favorite DC characters, and I want him in live action so bad. Obviously, we got him in the Arrowverse, and we got him in Titans. Say what you will about that show, I think Deathstroke is one of the more positive parts of that show. I wasn't a hater of the show. I actually found parts of it enjoyable. But that being said, we've never really gotten Deathstroke in a live action capacity before aside from TV. He's been in the Snyder cut of the Justice League, but realistically, he wasn't Deathstroke. He was just Slade Wilson in the future who's now teamed up with Batman to go against Superman. So that wasn't the traditional Deathstroke that we are used to seeing, and seeing him paired up against Batman to take him out with a personal vendetta would have just been so amazing. And I think we could have gotten a scene similar to Batman Arkham Origins, where he has that crazy epic fight right in the beginning of the game against Deathstroke. If we got anything even remotely close to that in live action, it would have been the best fight scene we've ever gotten in all of live action, and I stand by that. And I will forever be angry and salty that we were deprived of that until we get Deathstroke in live action versus either Batman or Nightwing, because he's my favorite DC superhero. But that being said, that's not the only thing that we were deprived of. We know there was a Man of Steel 2 planned, and there's actually a bunch out about this movie. Obviously, Henry Cavill was set to return, and we know who the villain was supposed to be, and that's Brainiac. And again, that is another villain who we haven't seen in live action aside from on TV shows. They did him in Smallville pretty well. I believe he was in Supergirl. I never finished the entire show, but we have never gotten him in a live action film before. So the fact that we not only missed out on Deathstroke, but we also were deprived of a live action Brainiac that could have had so many connections to Krypton and taught our version of Superman, Henry Cavill's Superman, so much more about his past life, about maybe things with Jor-El, maybe even go a little bit more in depth with Zod, because we know he was obviously the main villain of the first one. But the fact that we never got that second Man of Steel film, actually, in my opinion, I think hurts a lot of the other DCEU films. And that brings me to one of the biggest reasons, in my opinion, that universe failed, is they were trying too hard to copy the MCU at the current state of the MCU, rather than doing what the MCU did, which was building up to that major event movie. Having Man of Steel, having a standalone Batman film, maybe have a Wonder Woman or Green Lantern film, and then you have a sequel to one of those films, and then you do Batman vs. Superman. That way we're 4 or 5 movies into this universe, and then after that, then you have all these characters who have either been introduced or some of them have already met, and then you bring them together in a culmination of characters similar to how the Avengers did it in Phase 1. Then you have a Justice League film where, hey, maybe you only have to introduce one character, versus what you ended up with, having to introduce and get to know Aquaman, Flash, Cyborg, realistically Wonder Woman too, because she doesn't get a ton of screen time in Batman vs. Superman, and the screen time she gets, you don't really know anything about her because it's mostly just combat with her. So I think the rush to try and get to the level that the MCU was at is probably the biggest reason that universe ended up failing. But we were also deprived of a second and third Justice League movie. Zack Snyder has confirmed that he had plans for a Justice League trilogy, and that Justice League trilogy was going to be centered around Darkseid. And again, the fact that Darkseid is one of my favorite DC characters, DC villains, that also is why I'm a bit more salty about that, because I want him in a live action capacity so bad. We really haven't ever gotten him in any live action, even TV shows. I know Smallville kind of did Darkseid, but not really, and in my opinion, not well. That being said, we know a little bit about the plans for this movie. Obviously, some of it was teased in the Snyder Cut of the first Justice League film that we did end up getting, but there's even more beyond that. The second film was going to be centered around a post-apocalyptic world on Earth, where obviously we got the tease of an evil Superman. That was going to be the case, and it was going to be a result of Lois Lane losing her life or being thought to lose her life in some capacity. Now, there are a couple different storyboards out there, interviews with Zack Snyder, where some of it conflicts the other, so I don't think it was fully planned out. One of the rumors that I'm actually glad we never got was a romance between Batman and Lois Lane. And now, that's not to say that I don't think there's a version that works. They did that in the DCAU, and I think it worked really well and actually pushed Superman and Lois even closer together. But that was also before Superman and Lois got together. Versus in this universe, it would be after the death of Superman, and it would be after Lois Lane is already with Superman. So for her to go with Batman then, and then there were some rumors about she would end up being pregnant, it would either be Batman's or Superman's child. Again, I think that being scrapped was definitely a saving grace for us, because I don't think that would have been well received from the audience, at least not from me personally or anyone I've talked to on the matter. That being said, some of the other things that could have potentially been cool would have been obviously a Batman versus Superman fight, with Batman being more of the protagonist in this story of it, because Superman would have been under the control of Darkseid. And it would have culminated in Batman making some sort of sacrifice to then save Lois Lane, and this would have prompted Superman to turn back to good, and then in the third film, you would have had Superman leading a team of heroes to go into Apocalypse, which again, we haven't really seen in live action, which would be really cool. Apocalypse is a great setting for any type of a battle, anything like that, a lot of cool visuals, and it would have shown them going up against Darkseid, and then Superman ultimately defeating Darkseid. That was the plan for the initial DCEU. Now again, some of that wasn't concrete. Obviously, in some of the storylines, Lois Lane died, and that is what prompted Superman to get mind-controlled and fall victim to what Darkseid did to him. In other storylines, she is alive, and it's something else that prompts him to fall down that dark path, and it is kind of like with the anti-life equation, similar to that, taking Superman over and making him susceptible to that mind control. But either way, I think a lot of these storylines would have been amazing. Seeing the Flash travel back in time, change some of the timeline, maybe even getting some type of a Flashpoint storyline down the road would have also been really, really cool. And it's just a shame that because of studio interference and other things with certain films not doing well, we missed out on what could have been some of the greatest storylines we've ever seen for a comic book movie, specifically that Ben Affleck Batman movie. The other ones could have been really good, but they also could have had elements, specifically Batman impregnating Lois Lane, that were just horrible. But seeing Deathstroke go toe-to-toe with Batfleck is something that I don't think I'll ever forgive until we see that done justice in live action. But let me know what all of you think. Would you have enjoyed any of these films? Are you glad the Snyderverse ended up getting scrapped? What one of these films would you have wanted to see most? Let me know down in the comments. And while you guys are down there, like this video, subscribe to the page, hit that noti bell. and I'll see all of you in the next video. Goodbye.